Hi, today I would like to explain to you why you are anxious. Now, I don't know you, but there is ample research to explain the components of why you are anxious. And I think it's important if you want to do something about anxiety to really understand what it is. But to start this story, I have to take you back about 50 years. So please bear with me because I promise it will be worth it. When I was 16, I left school and went into an apprenticeship in the Swan Hunter shipyards in Wallsend on the River Tyne. Now, I was apprenticed as what's called a fitter, which basically means you fit the engines and pipework in the engine room of a ship. And I used to work on the supertankers because those were the ships that were being built predominantly at the time in lots of shipyards, but particularly in Wallsend because it had a history of being able to build big ships. Now, I have to say, I hated being an apprentice fitter. I wanted to be something else other than that, but those were the opportunities. Almost all of our class went into the shipyards or some other kind of heavy engineering around about that period. But in retrospect, it wasn't such a bad thing because it taught me to use tools. And so I am able to use tools. I'm pretty handy. I can do most things. It also taught me a little bit about engines, which proved useful, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But I learned to use tools. Now, my son, who is a philosopher, barely knows how to use a screwdriver because he doesn't have to, because it's not really relevant to him. When I finished my apprenticeship, the fact that I'd been an apprentice fitter in the shipyard enabled me to join the Merchant Navy as a marine engineer. So I actually joined the Merchant Navy as a fifth engineer. And this is a ship called the Ivy Bank, which was the last ship I served on before I left the Merchant Navy. And I went right the way around the world between the ages of 22 and 23. What an adventure. And that opportunity came to me because I had, unfortunately, or whatever, served my apprenticeship as a fitter in Swan Hunters. Of course, that ship's scrapped. Swan Hunters no longer exists. The whole thing has changed. But here's the thing. When you learn how to use tools, you also learn how to solve the kinds of problems that you need tools to solve. So a car engineer, a car mechanic, for instance, knows how to solve car problems and knows how to use the tools necessary to solve car problems. If you don't know how to understand the problem and if you don't know how to use tools, you have to pay someone to understand the problem and use the tools for you. And that's the situation with therapy. For the majority of people, they do not understand what anxiety actually is, and they don't understand the tools that you use to solve anxiety. Now, for more than 20 years, I've been developing online programs that teach you what anxiety is and teach you how to use the tools that a therapist will use to eradicate anxiety, to get it out of your life. But if you don't know what anxiety is and you don't know what the tools are, then basically you have to pay for a therapist to teach you what the problem actually is, what the tools are that you use, and how to use the tools. I'm not going to go through the whole process of how to eradicate anxiety from your life right now because that's more than one video. And if you absolutely want to get stuck into that, then definitely use my Anxiety Wizard program, which gives you all of the tools in 160 videos and audio. So it's a brilliant program for that. But what I want to do today is I want to start you off in actually understanding the nature of the problem of anxiety. So in this video, I'm going to tell you why you are anxious, and that starts the process. So what is anxiety? Okay, here's my definition. Anxiety is the experience of fear without a threat. So let me kind of review that again, right? It's the experience of fear. So it's the experience, the physiology of the fight or flight response. It's the physiology of fear, the emotion of fear, but you don't have a threat. Now, if you follow me and if you watch my videos, you'll know that I say there are two realities: external reality and internal reality. And the experience of fear originally was kind of developed, I suppose, or it evolutionarily arrived because it's an extremely useful emotion. You cannot ignore fear, because fear is a useful emotion, because fear kept your ancestors alive. Because if they felt fear, they would locate the source of the threat and they would respond appropriately. You know, typically it's fight or flee, and in some cases freeze, but a little bit less so with human beings. But animals certainly freeze. Sometimes they become catatonic if there's no escape route for them. So, many, I don't know, millions of years ago probably, and this is true of all mammals and lots of other animals too, we developed a fight or flight system which enabled us to respond appropriately to a threat. So you'd fight or you'd flee if you recognize a threat. And this has been extremely useful to us because it has kept us alive. That's why you can't ignore a threat. However, the thing is this: the kinds of threats that your ancestors, I mean long time ago, your ancestors responded to were life or death threats. I mean, there are serious threats to your viability as an organism, life or death, right? That's why you can't ignore it. And just to take that one step further, if you think, oh God, that's threatening, but it's not. If you think, oh God, that's threatening, but it's not. If you think, oh goodness, that's frightening, but it's not. There's no downside to that. So you can assume something is frightening as many times as you like and get it wrong, and there's no downside. But if something is frightening and you ignore it, then that might be the one opportunity the lion has to eat you. So you can't ever ignore fear because your survival relies on it. But your system can overestimate the things that you are exposed to and consider them to be frightening when they're not actually, and there's no downside to that. So fear cannot be ignored because it's useful, but doesn't mean to say that your brain always gets it right. Now, that was then, and this is now. To a large extent, for most people, we do not have the external reality threats that your ancestors have. I mean, for my part, I live in England, so I just don't have, threats. I'm not threatened by people, I'm not threatened by things. Now, certainly things like lack of money or poor social situation or friends and relationships, these can evoke anxiety, but they're not actually threats. They're not the kinds of threats that your system was designed to deal with. Your ancestors did not have language and they did not have imagination because they did not have consciousness. Consciousness is a fairly recent sort of add-on to the human experience. I don't know, maybe between 100,000 years ago and 50,000 years ago, we started to become aware of ourselves as individuals. That's basically consciousness. So you now have imagination and language that your ancestors did not have, but you have exactly the same fight or flight system and the same fear recognition system. So now you don't have external reality threats, now you have internal reality threats. I might have a crash, I might get exposed, I might feel ashamed, I might be embarrassed, someone might criticize me. These are now the threats that your fight or flight system responds to, but they're not actually threats, they're imaginations. I might get criticized, yeah, well you might not. Yeah, but I don't know. Well, do you need to feel anxious then? Well, apparently you do, because your fight or flight system is now responding to these internal reality threats, not the external reality threats it was originally designed to respond to. When you're born, you have a genetic heritage, and typically we think that the genetic heritage you have ranges from between 20 to 60%. Now, I generally say 50%. 50% is nature, that's what you're born with, and 50% is nurture, that's what you learn. It's variable for different people, but there's a combination of those two things. So let's deal with nature first of all. Your genetic heritage predisposes you to certain things, and it might predispose you to things like anxiety. It might predispose you to some degree to things like OCD or more severe mental health problems like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, for instance. But equally well, it may predispose you to creativity, to sociability, to extroversion, to openness to experience. So your genetic heritage is not all negative, it's just a mix of stuff. And generally in psychology, we think about genetic heritage like this. You say, these are possibilities. Your genetic heritage is possibility. And that possibility may be realized or it may not. So for instance, you may have the genetic heritage of being quite creative, but you may not find yourself in creative endeavors, and therefore it never really expresses itself. On the other hand, you may find yourself with an opportunity to be, let's say, more anxious, or slightly more neurotic, as it's traditionally called in personality structures, a little bit more anxious, and you might find opportunities to express that anxiety because your home environment might be a little bit, we'll call it unstable or uncertain or variable. So your genetic heritage is possibility. The other side of it, of course, is nurture. Now, when you start to develop your personality, you basically select from the personality structures that you have available to you. So basically, you select stuff from the people that you have around you, like your family, your friends, the caregivers, the people that you interact with. Your personality is built up from all of these experiences. Also, of course, more modernly, social media, games, films, other kinds of things. We select, not consciously, but we select from all of the experiences we have. And these selections amalgamate into what we might call personality structures. Or we more commonly think about them now in cognitive therapy as schemas, schemes, patterns. And so the schemas, the patterns that you develop, the personality structures that you develop, sort of pattern and shape your experience of reality. They filter out some information, they allow some information in, they pattern it and structure it so that you can make sense of your reality, your place in the world, and what's going on. So these schemas can be helpful, they can be unhelpful. Typically, however, if we have battles with panic, anxiety, depression, or stress, we are running, in our brain, we are running some schemas which are probably unhelpful. And this is a contributor to the overall experience of anxiety. So, as you're growing up, you're learning all of the time. You're learning some useful things. You're learning some non-useful things. Your fight or flight system was not designed to deal with internal reality threats like imagination. It was designed to deal with external reality threats. But now you don't have any external reality threats. Your brain has tuned itself in to now assume I might get criticized is a valid threat that requires a fight or flight response. I might get criticized. Well, fair enough. Okay, I might get criticized. How does that require a fight or flight response? How is fight or flight the correct solution? I might get criticized. I might have a car crash. Well, you might have a car crash. But how is fight or flight the correct response to that? Fight or flight, right? I might have a car crash. Well, you can't fight, so I don't know about that. But you could flee, right? You could not go in the car. Yeah, but not going in the car is not a solution to I might have a car crash. I mean, obviously it'll stop you having a car crash, but then you can't drive a car. And that is a bigger problem actually than having a car crash. So what we have is we have the inappropriate application of the fight or flight system to imaginations about things that could be unpleasant, could be difficult, but none of them are threatening. I mean, you might say, my life is meaningless. That feels like an existential threat. Okay, but is your life meaningless? Well, not really. It's a distortion, okay? So the fight or flight system now gives us the experience of anxiety, which is the fight or flight system, kicking off without an external reality threat, based upon our imagination of stuff that might happen. I might be ashamed. Well, you might be. But how does the fight or flight system solve that problem? So now, do you see? Your brain is making a mistake. When it makes you feel anxious, it's making a mistake. It's giving you the wrong response. Now, most people don't recognize that. Most people assume that whatever they're experiencing is valid. Most people assume that your brain is doing the right thing. Your brain's not doing the right thing. It's making a mistake. Once you realize that, your job, your fundamental task, has to be to retrain your brain to stop making these kinds of mistakes. I just came across a statistic the other day. I thought, well, goodness. Whenever you're talking about mental health problems, the numbers are always huge, right? In 2017, I think in America, 27,121 days were lost due to the disability of anxiety. 27,120. That's a lot of days just to the disability of anxiety. And you lose a day of disability to anxiety when you believe that your brain is actually giving you what you are supposed to have, right? Your brain is not. It's making a mistake. So if you want to really use the tools that fight this problem, that retrain your brain, that free you from anxiety, you have to learn what the tools are and you have to use the tools. Or you can pay a therapist to teach you what the tools are and to teach you how to use the tools. That's an alternative strategy. I'm suggesting that you can learn to do it yourself. Retrain your brain out of panic, anxiety, depression, stress, and then you're free. You are, in principle, your own therapist. So, thanks for taking the time to watch and listen. If you found this interesting, and if you want to learn the tools, then please think about joining my Anxiety Wizard program. It gives you everything that you need.